The Square Ball Podcast.
Welcome to the show, The West Stand, our new show that's out on a Monday and a Friday. It's available on YouTube and in your podcast app. We welcome guests from across the world of Leeds United. I'm Dan Moylan. With me is Michael Normanton. And today's guest, Mr. LUTV, the voice of Leeds United these days. Is that too much of it? No, you're squinting at that. Bryn Law, anyway. Bryn Law's here.
I'll take it. But Mr. LUTV, I'm not sure about that, to be honest.
Well, you are soundtracking Leeds United's bid for promotion this season.
Again.
Yeah, once again. Will it be a success, Bryn? So we're off the back of it.
Oh, my, right in at the deep end, eh?
Yeah.
I was thinking when I was considering my trip in to have this conversation earlier, what are the traps that I need to watch out for? And one of them is getting overly giddy potentially about Leeds' prospects for this season, I suspect. But with that cool, calm, analytical ability that I have to sort of discern what's right and wrong in this situation, and very much concerned about the sort of social media trend these days for that aged well type comments to be hurled back into your onto your timeline. I think Leeds have got a really good chance of getting promoted this season.
You've been spending too much time in the media and with the media. That's all I'll say. You can tell actually because you do sort of media coaching and social media awareness and stuff for sports people, don't you? So
I do, and so I mean we'll talk about it later, I'm sure. But you know, when I saw stuff at Watford over the weekend, I kind of raised an eyebrow. Social media stuff at Watford over the weekend.
The Luton Watford back and forth.
The Luton Watford back and forth, because one of the things I know from the coaching perspective, having worked with loads of them down the years, is that they are often a little bit concerned, to say the least, when they see some of the stuff that their super eager in-house social media team is keen to produce by way of content, because they only see the outcome, which is, well, you've done his job for him there, haven't you?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the phrase that has often been sort of bandied around, you know. So at risk of doing any of that, I think Leeds have got quite a good chance of getting promoted this season.
Very diplomatic. What do you make of Chris Wilder, actually? Because that sort of feeds back into what
Chris was on my course. Chris was on the course.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So you coached him?
Yeah.
What's your assessment of your pupil then?
Well, I had a nice chat. Listen, I like Chris, okay? It's all out there. Now, so Ellen Road was not in agreement with me on that one on Friday night, for absolutely certain, as became all too clear midway through the second half. But he did say to me, he mentioned before the game, I haven't seen him for a while in fairness, but he did say before the game, we had a quick little dialogue in the tunnel area where I was doing interviews, he'd done the Sky stuff. And he said, "Oh, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing? Yeah, good. Good. I've had a good coach. And he was talking about me and the media stuff. And he said, "Why you haven't rung me? Why haven't you rung me?" And I said, "I just haven't got the time, Chris. I haven't got the time." Because he's been involved in a lot of stuff from the media perspective, Chris, that has caused him some. I think it's caused him some issues. But he'd probably tell you it was all fine. It was all good. So it's interesting. It is an interesting one because he did that. I think the one I've used, because I'm always on the lookout for stuff I can use in sessions with coaches, real world examples that are up to date, so that I can say this is an ongoing process. You know, this isn't something that we're talking about that happened 15 or 20 years ago when I started doing it. It's ongoing now. So last season, one of the things that I used was Chris and that conversation about, and he was eating a sandwich. When he'd gone in to speak to the officials after the game, and I'm a Premier League manager, and he was eating a sandwich, and that then became that Guardian cartoon that David Squires does. It's often brilliant. So he then if you get incorporated into that cartoon, then you're probably in trouble, because he will seize upon something like that and create wonderful imagery around it. And there was a whole cartoon about Alan Neil being Chris Wilder's kind of manservant and bringing food, and the language was the language of sort of Regency England or something like that in the cartoon strip. Anyway, you have to go and have a look at it and to take my word for it. So because you've then become a figure of fun, right? That's kind of, and that happens, to bring it back to the social media thing, that happens so quickly and so easily in this day and age. One phrase sticks with you, or one Dutch accent sticks with you a lifetime in the world of coaching potentially, and to shed that perception becomes really, really difficult. And so that's like Chris. It's not the first time that Chris has kind of said something where, if I was at his shoulder advising him, I'd have said it's probably not worth saying that, Chris. But he's his own man. He's his own man, and he loves a wind up. You could tell that because the comment before the game about and like you guys have, you've obviously been listening to the Square Ball podcast, the interview, and all the rest of it. And well, yeah, maybe that, I don't know. Anyway, that's another story. But so that phrase he used before the game about Leeds having the biggest championship budget ever was, I mean, that's part of what a manager would describe as pre-match psychology. It's an attempt to do a little bit of winding up there, which not many actually partake in these days. I think that would probably be seen as a little bit kind of as an old school concept in a way. But then he came back to it again. He said really nice things about Leeds after the game, but he also said, but then so they should, because they've got the biggest budget in the championship. So it was still there. So
the mask slipped for a bit.
It was still there as a theme, if you like.
Yeah.
And so, Chris wasn't going to let go completely on that basis. So he's, I mean, if you look, he's had a fabulous managerial career, frankly, and for what he's done, where he came from, because I tracked it, because obviously he was on the course, and I want to know the background of the people that I'm going to deal with. So having known him a bit as a player, but then looked into his managerial career, he's done some great things, really, because he's always been working. He's almost always worked with tight budgets. I mean, Halifax in particular, there was nothing happening for them financially there, but he did really well. So he's done a load of really good stuff, but there's still a perception about him which probably comes through the way he presents himself in the media. And that's if you're being safe and cautious as a coach, you just go for the safe and cautious approach. That rhymes. But, because you don't want to say anything that's going to see you kind of pilloried, in future. I don't think Chris has got the filter. I think he just says it.
We were saying, though, it was quite nice, really, to have a recognisable personality on the sidelines, because it seems to be, particularly these days, when there's a bit more of a fashion for bringing in young overseas managers. Like, you beat Norwich and you look to the sideline and you go, I don't truthfully even know which one of those is the manager.
It's a German hipster coach.
There's just like some bloke is their manager. Whereas with Wilder, you're like, yeah, good. This feels nice and old fashioned. And when we're winning, we can sing at him. And if he wins, we know we're going to have to put up with him kind of crowing about it. But it's, there's another game later in the season.
It's pantomime.
That's right. That's it. It's pure pantomime.
You just made a very balanced and reasoned and nuanced argument there, Bryn. But 33,000 people on a Friday night singing Wilder is a wanker. It's not the space for nuance, is it? It's black and white.
Yeah, but now it's Monday morning, and we've all had a little time to sleep and reflect. And
a couple of people have told me, he's actually a really nice guy.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm still going to sing the song. Sorry, Chris.
I'm absolutely sure he passes the pint test, which is always an interesting mark for me.
He is the sort of bloke you would sit down and have a pint with, I think. I have a test for that, is would you share a car journey with I've done this with a number of managers, so for various reasons. So you're in the car with them for, more than 10 minutes, or so it might be an hour or 2 hours. Is that a comfortable car journey? And so the one that stands out in my memory was Paul Jewell. Drove Paul Jewell back from Cardiff one year, and it was great. It was really good. And Paul Jewell is a great guy. I always got on well with him as a player, and really got on well with him as a manager.
Best with trousers on rather than off, though.
I'd say so.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
Right. You pulled that one out from the depths, didn't you? So that because you can have the thing that makes that work is that you can have a relatively normal conversation with somebody. So even though while Paul Jewell and I in the car were chatting, Wigan had just been promoted to the Premier League, and I think it was Wigan. Yeah, it was Wigan. And so he'd been a pundit on the playoff weekend for Sky, so I was giving him a lift back to Leeds where he lived. And so we were chatting away, and in between bits of conversation, his mobile phone kept ringing, as managers do. And he kept saying, "Oh, I've got another one on here. chat. And they say, there's another lad from, I don't know, Mozambique, whose agent tells me his ambition has always been to play for Wigan Athletic. So we were having these kind of ongoing conversations, and he was just having a laugh about it. And that is that there actually, you're right, there aren't that many of those. When I look at the game in general now, I don't see that many of those types of guys in it. That what we do, and I'm as guilty as anybody in the sense with this, is we now create coaches who are often never been footballers. They've often been coaches from a very early age now. And so they do coaching. And what they talk about is, guess what? Coaching. Yeah. And they've just, because that's how they do it, that's how they rise, because they commit themselves to the concept of I'm a coach completely. Everything, all in. It's all about the coaching. So a guy like Pep Linders, who I got to know at Liverpool, who was Jurgen Klopp's assistant, Pep's a brilliant, lovely, lovely guy, but absolutely obsessional about football and coaching and formations and the setup. And I sat and watched the European Cup Champions League final, whatever they call it these days. I'm old school. And he taught me through the game. It was fascinating. He taught me through what was happening and what I was watching and what I was seeing. But I'm not sure. I don't know whether Pep's really got much on. Do you know anything about pop music? Or I don't know. What's your favourite beer? I don't know whether there's that bit to it. So a lot of young coaches now, I think they see that the way, rightly so, they see the way forward is to be, this is it. This is all I do. Mm. I do coaching. I talk about coaching. So I'm not quite sure you'd have, the first 20 minutes in the car with them, you'd get past 4-4-2 and I don't know, 5 at the back or whatever. After that, you might begin to struggle a little. Where do I go with this one next?
See any telly over the weekend? Yes. No.
Yes, I watch the football.
That's it.
Okay, right, yeah.
Imagine when you take this to its logical conclusion from a Leeds point of view. Imagine sitting in a car with Marcelo Bielsa, quite apart from any language barrier. And sitting there in awe. I was just like, been on any good flights recently?
You'd have to, the best bit for a 2-hour car journey would have been to say to Marcelo, just tell me again why it was that you sent somebody to watch Derby County training, and then that should just about get you home.
Tyler Roberts discuss something like that.
Could be, yeah.
With regards to Wilder, actually, I have to say,
I've got a Tyler Roberts anecdote, by the way. I have to tell you this.
Right.
I'm glad you mentioned him. So I'm watching Wrexham the other week, and I'm behind the goal in the international weekend, and Wrexham are playing Northampton. We've got this open end thing that they've built at Wrexham now, temporary stand. So I'm sitting in there. I'm quite close to the pitch. I'm about 3 rows back. And in the second half, Wrexham are winning easily. And in the second half, Northampton on a rare. Tyler Roberts is playing for Northampton. And I only noticed him in the second half. I think he was playing both halves, but I only noticed him second half. He was kicking towards us. And he had a load of shots and stuff, and he played pretty well, to be fair. And then one of his teammates had a shot that flew from a really good position, flew over the crossbar. And that moment happened where I was behind the goal and the ball landed at my feet in the stand behind the goal. So I picked it up, and Tyler was the closest Northampton player on the pitch. So they want to get on with the game because they're losing and all the rest of it. So he looks to see where the ball's gone, and I stand up with ball in hand. And there's a moment when he looked at me, and I could see.
Is it the I know you from somewhere?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What? He's going.
And what are you doing there?
Yeah. So I'd given a little thumbs up, and a kind of a sort of thin smile played across his face. They're getting walloped at this point, by the way, as well. And then I threw the ball back to Tyler, and the game went on. Just a tiny little moment like that.
It's like seeing your teachers in the supermarket. Something like that. What are you doing here?
You shouldn't have thrown it back to him, though. You should have looked him in the eye and then thrown it behind you if you're winning.
Done that one where you throw it to the side.
That's the right thing to do in that situation.
And then get a bit of a cheer.
Yeah, exactly.
And then pop up on social media and be destroyed.
I was going to say, with regards to Wilder, I was slightly put out by how reasonable and generous he was about Leeds in the post-match. I wanted him to say something a bit salty, because I think a lot of the grief that he got was based in pantomime, and it was based around the Muppets from Leeds, I think. It feels like we've owed him one for a bit regards to that, which was caught on camera phone when they were having beery celebrations for getting promoted at our expense.
Yeah, which isn't the greatest time for saying your most measured stuff, is it?
But as Bryn will tell you, I'm sure, Bryn, tapping into your expertise here, there's a camera in everybody's...
Well, that's exactly what we say on pretty much every session we do. is that you guys have to be aware that there's a camera now literally everywhere. And there are, there are more than that example. We've had other people on the course who've been caught out in little rows they've had with fans in the car park, and somebody in the background who's not partaking has got the camera up, and then that thing goes out. And
I think Paul Jewell set up the camera himself, actually. But,
they were actually genuinely different times because the dynamic now is absolutely about that. Is about the fact that you, as frustrating as it may feel, the actual act of having any kind of conversation in public now for any level football coach, frankly, is actually quite difficult.
Yeah,
because you have to be nuanced in terms of all the time.
I have to be honest and say, I think doing this and this being on YouTube has made me improve my behaviour in public. It genuinely has.
Well, you're no longer lashing out at the staff in Aldi anymore.
Exactly, yeah. You don't want to be caught. And that's not to suggest I've got any sort of profile whatsoever, but I'm just sort of acutely aware of that. If somebody happens to recognise me, that I'm like, oh, it's that prick from that
I've
podcast.
had this conversation with a famous ex-Chelsea player who's on the course as well, about something he'd put on social media about a taxi journey that he'd had.
Wasn't Dennis Wise,
that's exactly where my mind went.
Dennis Wise.
No.
I can confirm it wasn't Dennis Wise.
For the best.
And I pointed out that if the taxi driver saw what had been written about him on social media, that he might have a comeback to that. And if he did, was my man going to be sure that actually painted him in a good light as well? And so, because there is that potential for people, the people that you call out, to have their opportunity to respond, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And even at the lowly level at which I operate, it's a consideration.
Yeah.
Those people will say to you, somebody sent me a message on social media in the last few days saying, I'd put something up about Carl Darlow playing for Wales, winning again for Wales, and somebody responded by saying, should Darlow be in place of Meslier this weekend? But I can't answer that, because what happens if I do? Yeah. I could, but it's got to be with I can't answer that, because I can't answer that.
Yeah,
because there's too much. I could answer it, but there's too much riding on the outcome in terms of So I wouldn't answer that.
Yeah. There's no right answer to it, is there? Because you upset somebody.
There isn't from my perspective, because it is seen as being carrying a bit more weight, or whatever it might be. It's ruddy complicated now. I mean, that's, again, every coaching module, this is where we start. Guys, this is very complicated now. So I go through the people on the course, I go through their social media as part of what I do for the prep for the course, to see whether there's anything in there that I would advise wasn't in there, or that they're doing stuff generally that's good, or that they're doing stuff that is probably not so good, or they're doing stuff they should, or things they should do more of. So we do that as an element in it as well. And which is based on my kind of experience of running a social media account with a profile for quite a long time now. So it's only based on that experience. But, quite often you'll go through the archive, as I describe it, because you can't get rid of this stuff readily, and find things in there that genuinely shouldn't really be in there. Not if you are a professional operating in a professional sporting environment. That's got to go.
Yeah.
And I'll sometimes point things out to people, and we tend to do it in the room unless it's serious, and they'll be embarrassed by what I share. And if they're embarrassed by it, straight away it's wrong.
Yeah.
Because
would you say it in person now?
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. And that happens quite regularly still. So we've had social media for quite a long time now, but the way that everybody with a public platform in particular struggles to deal with it is ongoing. And those lessons still don't seem to have been learnt.
To Friday night itself then, from a commentary perspective, I'm sure you must have enjoyed that as one of the sort of biggest games of the season. There was a nice atmosphere inside Ellen Road. Just that little bit of edge, that little bit of bite maybe that someone like Wilder brings, I suppose. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I did. I really enjoyed it, because it's hard not to enjoy watching Leeds at the moment. And that applies to last season as well as this season, because there's one key fact here, which is occasionally ignored or overlooked, I think, that Leeds very rarely lose a game. that's been the case for well over a year now.
It's really nice. We're kind of in that sweet spot. If we can cement ourselves in the top 2 now going forward, I think people might actually briefly enjoy being Leeds fans for a bit.
Go on, give it a go.
It's possible. It depends on the chasing pack, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If there's a nice cushion there.
Have you indulged in any self-talk about this season? Where he's like, I can't go on like this.
I suppose I've convinced myself this year.
Are you still? You see, I don't do optimism by any stretch, as anybody close to me will readily testify. But in the circumstances, if you analyse, take it from the professional perspective, ask Tony DeRigo, for instance, and he'll say to you, well, I've looked at all the teams, and of all the teams I've seen so far, Leeds are the best.
I would agree.
I would agree as well. I know that.
So that I would also agree with that. So that does lend itself in terms of the number of teams that Leeds have played from the positions that you assume will be occupied by those who will be challenging at the end of the season. That would then suggest that Leeds should have, to bring me right back to the original point, I haven't gone very far with this, should have a pretty decent chance of getting promoted.
Yeah, over the weekend I've been thinking through, like, well, maybe we can just be top, and there can be a chasing pack, but they're really more bothered with each other than they are with us.
Yep.
So it'd be like, Sunderland taking points off Sheffield United, who then go to Middlesbrough, who then go to West Brom, who then go to
Chris Wilder
Burnley.
said it in the aftermath of the game the other night. It was one of the key comments. He said they're the first team we've played who are at a different level. And that's the supposition with the Championship that the conclusion I come to is that we make judgment in terms of Championship teams playing other Championship teams. So Sheffield United are unbeaten going into that one. Sunderland, top of the table going into that one, but they haven't played a team as good as Leeds. The suggestion for me here is that there is only one team of that calibre. Listen, this is the bit that now suddenly I'm being lured into a crazy comment here.
Note to self, clip this bit.
Exactly, yes. Well, that aged well. There isn't a team of that calibre in the division. There isn't a Leicester there this year. There isn't even an Ipswich there, I don't think, this year.
Now, I'm going to just put my devil's advocate hat on here for a second and say...
Oh, it's nice. I like it.
We were miles better than Ipswich in the games that we played them last season.
And better than Leicester.
Both of them. I mean, Leicester was a fairly titanic struggle, I think, on both counts, wasn't it? But I think we were...
Demonstrably better.
Demonstrably better than Ipswich, but they had the knack of beating everybody else, whereas we didn't.
Yeah. Well, that's it, and that's probably the kind of the cautious caveat to the. So looked at. So you would have said, and I did say last season, Leeds are the best team in the division. Actually, I think Leicester probably were. Frankly, Southampton certainly weren't, and I think we've seen evidence of that this time around. How difficult they're finding it in the Premier League. But and Chris Wilder said he studied the Southampton game plan from the playoff final in terms of the way he picked his team for Friday night's game. Well, that didn't work very well, did it? So he obviously hadn't got the players that Southampton had got. They were at a better level probably than what Chris had on Friday. But still, I think what maybe it does come down to is kind of in Leeds' destiny lies in Leeds' hands.
Yeah.
What do you make of the squad versus last year? Because obviously sold a huge amount of players not a huge amount of players, a huge amount of money came in for a few players. But I was thinking on the other night, like having the Rothwell Tanaka almost not as a replacement for Jorginho, but though they actually do make forward runs from midfield, and it just changed the shape of us a little bit. And I feel like overall I don't feel at this stage we're really any weaker.
It's interesting that because the 4 words I'd written down just then on my sheet as Bryn was talking were better than last season ?
Oh yeah, well it's a really good question, and perhaps the whole is better potentially. I don't think it's not the ideal scenario for creating this new midfield unit by any stretch of the imagination to have your 2 top guys out for months and months, but. Needs must and all the rest of it. And what you maybe have, and the next few weeks will tell us a bit more about this, is a little less caution and a bit more let's have a go at this, because we're quite solid defensively now. We've got guys who've played quite a bit of decent level football. Pascal Struijk's played a lot of Premier League football, and as long as we don't misjudged bounces in the penalty area. Then there's a goalkeeper behind who's played a lot of games as well. But so you've got something of a unit in there that's already sort of racking up the clean sheets. So let's go and see what you can do in front, because the real joy in the Leeds team is in the attacking play, isn't it? You know, there are players who've left who are good at that, but there are definitely players who've come in who are also still good at that. One or two stayed who are good at that as well.
The recruitment's starting to look good, isn't it? I think.
Well, I think that's a conclusion you've got to come to, frankly, because the players who've been brought in look like good players, and they won't have. This stuff doesn't get planned on the back of the proverbial fag packet. That these things are sort of years in the making. These plans. So I like the look of what's coming. I mean, Tanaka looks great, looks really good, and looks proper good fit in terms of his attitude, but his ability as well.
It's just very, very, very calm under pressure. I mean, I don't know, we've kind of had this long-standing running joke on this show about me when he first made his first 5-minute sub cameo, and it's evolved into me calling him a generational talent. But that was exactly the thing that I noticed. He just seemed to want it, and it'd be pass and move into a space. He just seemed to have really good situational awareness and just seemed very, very tidy and just unflustered.
I've just written the word tidy down. It's like it's a football cliches thing. I feel like they'd go into like what defines a tidy player.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just see it, and with Tanaka you go, yeah, just really like almost quite compact in his movements, like just unfussy but very efficient, and
his kit's always nicely pressed as well.
I just feel like he's just just very well presented.
A well presented young man, which is what we like. Yeah, him and Rothwell were great, I thought.
Yeah, that's what there was lots of energy about their play going forward, and so that that dynamic has maybe been forced upon the team, and it brings something a bit. It maybe puts a bit more onus on the guys behind them, but I think the guys behind them can probably handle that as long as they all stay fit, given the lack of centre halves as well as central midfielders.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the one thing, like reading Wacko and reading Twitter and all that sort of thing, fans had identified maybe that we needed to, a bit like I suppose Gareth Southgate's England, it's like let the handbrake off a little bit, and necessity is the mother of invention and all that. So maybe that's what's happened. It's a change that we didn't want to see forced on the midfield, but it's a change that might benefit the overall direction of the season.
Well,
and do you think maybe Daniel Farke will learn something from this and say, actually, do you know what? Maybe we can afford to have some more forward-thinking players in there. It's interesting, isn't it?
I don't know whether Daniel will learn anything from it. I'm not sure he's at. I mean, everyone continually learning from things. I mean, he's had to do it because he's had to do it. But I think it is. I remember Norman Hunter telling me an anecdote many years ago about Don Revie, who they all loved and adored, and who was incredibly successful. And Don used to create the dossier that he would have on the opposition. He was the first kind of English manager to do that. And they would get handed this dossier in the build-up to the next game. It was a big, thick thing, loads of pages long. And Norman said, to be honest, I don't think anybody really read them. But it was it was Don's way of kind of making sure that so it's very like the modern way of thinking, that every I was dotted, every T was crossed.
That's what Bielsa did as well.
Yeah. So it was pushing the information in their direction so that they knew as much about the opposition as possible. And then Norman said, but there was a different reality. He said, because basically he said there was one game that they played. I can't remember who the opposition was. And Leeds were not going to win the league. It was towards the end of the season. They were close, but they weren't going to win it. And so Don said, I think they had a big cup game, coming up, European game. So it was like the focus was really on the other game. And so Don Revie came in before the game and said, lads, just play. And he said, we were brilliant that day. And we just played. And when you look at the way the Southampton game, that famous Southampton game, that period of possession that leads to the goal in that game, that was Leeds just playing, doing stuff, back heels, flicks, and all the rest of it. So actually, they had 11 better. Almost every single game they played, they had 11 better players than the opposition. And that was the only thing, in a way, Norman's suggestion was that actually, if he'd have done that a little bit more, maybe Don, and said to them, lads, you're better than these, just go and play.
Yeah.
Some of the criticism I picked up from Sheffield United fans of the other night was that Wilder went too defensive and he changed their system, and he's not playing to the strengths of the players anymore. And he'd seen he said himself, he'd seen what Southampton did last year and tried to go with something like that as a way of stopping Leeds, and didn't work. It was
unusual that he changed his line. I mean, he dropped 4 players. They'd won the game before. The lad who scored the 2 goals that won them the game before was on the bench. So that concept that you have of, don't change a winning team, he changed a winning team completely to ahead of the game at Leeds, which I think that's relatively unusual to have somebody who says, right, I've got to create something completely different for this level when you've unbeaten. So it's not as if you barely conceded a goal in weeks. In fact, you haven't conceded a goal in weeks. So he did change everything completely to meet Leeds, and it clearly didn't work, obviously, because they were ultimately well beaten, weren't they?
It's hard for a coach because you only get to see the version that unfolded, don't you? You don't get to see the. Well, he sticks with the same team when we win that 4-0.
Exactly.
You don't get to see that version.
And then he gets kind of hammered for that. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, perhaps, because ultimately the assessment he might have made was actually Leeds have got better players than us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I spotted somebody on Wacko over the weekend, and forgive me, I can't remember who it was, so I can't credit the right person, but cited Bielsa, just to return to him for a second, saying that Leeds are the protagonists.
Got to move on, fellas. You've got to move on.
It's he was saying Leeds are the protagonists. I'll never move on. Leeds are the protagonists in every game in the Championship, and I don't think we realised how true that was. Maybe even of Bielsa's side trying to get promoted, because we were just sort of immersed in it, and it was new and it was different and it was exciting. Whereas now, having been around the block again and we're doing this again, it's more evident to me now, and that's the biggest reflection of it. I think you've got unbeaten Sheffield United changing everything, chucking everything out just to deal with this one team. And it goes to show just how, I use the word exceptional. I don't mean exceptional in the sense of, exceptionalism. I just mean like it's an exceptional way to deal with this particular team versus everybody else in the division. Wasn't so evident to me first time around with Bielsa. Now I'm sort of look back on that and this season and go, bloody hell, we've got to deal with a lot. We have to deal with everybody trying to bring their A game and often sit deep on the edge of their box every single week. And I think if we do get up at the end of the season, perhaps the achievement of doing so deserves more credit than it might get. I don't know.
Well, there's pressure on every single Leeds United match. I mean, that's been the case for as long as I've lived here, frankly. But sometimes it's an unrealistic expectation. But every defeat feels like, I've said this before, every defeat is, utterly calamitous and the end of the world. And then every decent 2-0 home win against Sheffield United is I predict a riot, 25 minutes of celebrations at full time sort of thing. And so if you think back to last season, you think back to the Leicester game, you think of the atmosphere at the end of that was as good as anything I've ever experienced at Ellen Road. And the mood at the end of that was as good as anything I've ever experienced at Ellen Road. It was so incredibly upbeat. Didn't actually lead to promotion though. So the kind of the journey is one of ups and the journey is one of downs. But running through the thread at the moment, I think, is the recognition that Leeds have still got a strong, it's not a massive squad as we're seeing at the moment, but they've definitely looked like they've got quality over quantity in there, and they still have options to do things. So you've got two really good wingers who came on in the latter stages of the game the other night. Really good wingers, certainly at championship level. Two international wingers come on to replace the two that you've taken off, and that's the ability that other teams don't have.
Yeah, we said that's almost not fair, but it's nice to be on this side of the equation rather than
that's what the investment's there for. And let's not kid ourselves. There's been significant investment, even in a squad that's lost some of its big stars. There's still been significant investment in the squad, and that's why you do it. Yeah. You do it to have. This applies to Chelsea, it applies to Manchester City, it applies to Wrexham. You spend more in Birmingham City. You spend more money to get better players than the rest.
On that sort of thread, just looking at Ipswich, did you see there was a tweet that went viral over the weekend from an Ipswich fan? And I wondered, and I timestamped it. And I remember when they got promoted, I can't remember if I said on this show whether I tweeted it or something, but said, I wonder at what point they'll come to hate the Premier League. 8 games in, I think is the answer. That viral tweet. And it's only one person's opinion, but I think looking in the comments beneath it, everyone's sort of saying, it was like, it's like, I think it was something along the lines of pulling a worldie. And then when you get home, it doesn't quite happen, should we say? I don't think anybody's enjoyed it. It's more a case of enjoying the journey rather than the destination. It's really, really hard as the Premier League, and they've dropped 100 million quid only to be sat 17th.
Well, I saw another comment in the last couple of days where Sheffield United fans said, we want to win the Championship but not get promoted.
That's what we were saying last year. Yeah. Can we just stay here and do this every year? That's what I meant about Leeds being in the sweet spot, perhaps, just for a bit.
Yeah. So, it's a completely different experience. Yeah. It's a completely different experience regardless. Even a good season in the Premier League is still a completely different experience because you are going to have to work so hard for the meager return in terms of staying up, frankly. So it is a different experience, but it's the great conundrum, isn't it? It's the place, if you want to do the things with Ellen Road that people want to do with it, that needs to be done with Ellen Road. If you want sort of longevity in terms of the high level stuff, if you fancy a little nibble at European football again, and why not, then there's only one place that you do that from. Yeah. And so if that's what you want to do, then you've got to get there.
You're basically just committing yourself to a massive struggle is what you're doing. And I think we've struggled enough.
Yeah, well, initially at least, but there's a point at which you've got to get, you've got to get beyond that. Yeah. I think we're way ahead of ourselves here, by the way, people, but I think I would have greater confidence now that might be achievable. Yeah. Than I may have done even previously.
I think that is tied to the stadium as well, isn't it? It's awful things like match day income, stuff that you don't want to care about.
Streams.
Yeah, but it's stuff you don't want to care about, but you also understand this is the currency of.
That's why Brighton are a bigger club than Leeds. So hiss, boo. But it's a fact currently because they have a stadium that generates the sort of revenue that Leeds do really, really well on the revenue generation, but it's finite, isn't it? There's only so much you can do with it. But Brighton, because they've had that long spell in there with all the TV cash coming in, plus they've got a stadium that helps them create on that basis. And they're probably not even the best example currently, but they now operate at a different level. Because
it helps having £500 million worth of debt owed to your owner as well. Let's not.
Well, yeah. So there are ways and means. Okay, there are always ways and means, but they have an infrastructure in place there that helps them, in a number of very different ways.
But what makes that a bitter pill to swallow, though, is knowing that Leeds has the greater potential.
That's it.
Thing, yeah.
But
it's only unrealised
potential's
potential.
Value has become less and less significant in a sense in football. Wrexham have great potential to be something a little bit more than we were when the guys came in and took over at Wrexham. But realistically, how big is that? How great is that potential? I mean, realistically, there's the dream bit, and then you hit the reality bit. So it's got to be realistic potential. You've got to see where it can go, but you've got to also see how that fits in terms of what everybody else is doing at the same time as well. So, I mean, Leeds are a long way off on that basis still, and it will take a lot more movement forward to get to that position. And then you become maybe a different beast as well. And then you have that bit to contend with.
Well, let's get promoted first. But as you were saying...
well, yeah, exactly.
We've got a chance?
I think there's a possibility.
Thanks for coming in, Bryn. We'll see you soon.
You're welcome.
The Square Ball Podcast.